All right. Hello, everyone. Facebook Live seems to have changed its layout again, so hi, everyone. It's Katie from the Clark Museum. Today, I'm channeling my inner radio broadcaster. And just want to say welcome to today's Ask the Curator. So I guess a quick little background. I'm Katie at the Clark Museum, Clark Historical Museum. We're in Old Town Eureka, Humboldt County, California. And we were founded in this building in 1960. We're in the historic Bank of Eureka building that was built by Albert P.C. in 1912. This is the office. It's considerably less picturesque than the rest of the building. But yeah, so just kind of how Ask the Curator works is you can ask me questions, put them in the comments. I can see them, so I'll answer them as they come through. And yeah, I'll kind of talk a little bit about what's going on at the Clark right now, kind of some things we've been working on. But along the way, if you have any questions about that or about something else, feel free to let us know or let me know, and I'll go ahead and answer them. So let's see. So first thing, I want to say I hope y'all are having a happy and good and empowering Juneteenth. If you haven't heard of Juneteenth or want to know a little bit more about it, there's a website called juneteenth.com, JUNETEENTH.com. It's got a lot of the history about Juneteenth, where the term comes from, why it's a holiday, and all kinds of things like that. So definitely be sure to check that out if you haven't yet. Let's see. So what's going on at the Clark? A lot of people have been asking when we're going to reopen, and the answer right now is still we don't know. Sorry, I just got to scoot this over. We don't know. So you guys might have been hearing that museums in Southern California are reopening, other parts of the country are reopening. I've been hearing from other places around the country that people are planning on reopening July 1st. We're keeping in touch with the county of Humboldt, who's determining who can reopen when. And I emailed them just yesterday. They're very quick to respond, which is really nice. But they don't have an anticipated reopening date for museums. So we're still closed. Still bringing you quality content through our social media pages, so keep tabs on that. But even though we are closed, we are still doing stuff. We're doing a lot of stuff, actually. So we have our little weekly staff meetings via Zoom every Friday. And so today we were kind of talking about what we've all been working on. One of our staff members, Alex, has been working on scanning photographs from our collection, and she just finished with, I think, her 5th box of photos, and I'm not sure exactly how many photos there are, but those photo boxes can hold a lot. So we're getting her set up with her next set of boxes, which, just kind of for reference, this is one of the boxes. This one happens to have photos about entertainment, including music and other forms of entertainment. This one doesn't seem to be totally full, but it does seem kind of heavy. But she's been scanning away on photos, and the reason why that's important is so we can use the scanned photos for reprints. We can send them to researchers. They can use them in their research. We can reprint them. If you've seen our postcard collection sales, we do sell a lot of photographs that have been reprinted onto postcards, and we use them for all kinds of different things. So it's really good for the longevity of the photograph. It means we have to handle it less, and kind of stuff like that. So that we got that going on. Our social media manager, Dana, is keeping busy as always, getting all of our social outreach stuff up and running every day, 7 days a week. So be sure you're checking out all that. Some other things that were going on this week. Oh, you know what? Actually, I should mention, we do also have 2 interns that are working with us. If you get our newsletter, we've sent out kind of introductions on 2 of our interns. One of them is Hannah. She started volunteering here before the COVID outbreak happened, doing different little projects in our Victorian room. And she's currently researching for an exhibit on domestic economy in the Victorian period, which is really interesting. It's kind of how women operated their households, how they were expected to operate their households, things like that. I'm really looking forward to it. That's going to be really interesting. And then our other intern is Melina, and she's researching notable women of Humboldt County based on a list made by Arlene Harton, our historian extraordinaire, who just kind of is in every organization related to history in Humboldt County. And she's researching about 14 or 15 women each week for that list. And that's going to go into an exhibit that we're going to do at the end of the year. So we're all keeping really busy. Some of the things that have been kind of going on here at the museum, even though we're closed, is our historic lighting project. So you might have heard early on in the year that or earlier on this year and even late last year, that we were able to raise enough money to purchase and restore some of the historic chandeliers in our building. And we're in the process right now of getting them hung up. The hanging process was not as straightforward as initially planned, so it's taken a little bit longer to do. But that looks like it's going to start moving forward again this week, which is exciting. I'm really stoked to get those chandeliers up, and I'm really excited to share that with all of you. So stay tuned for next week. We'll hopefully be posting pictures and videos of the work being done on those chandeliers. Also, something that was going on this past week, and also last week, is I got a call from the Historical Society, Jim, their archivist, who had been contacted by someone who's working on clearing out part of the Times Standard building, and they had a large quantity of newspapers from the late 80s. Well, actually, some of them went back to the 40s, all the way into the 2000s. And they were at risk for being tossed. So Jim and I coordinated with a bunch of different people and were able to get those newspapers taken out and kept for historic research, for history. So I wrote a blog post about that. It's going to get put up early next week, so keep an eye out for that. But that was a really exciting project to be able to work on, kind of salvage preservation, I guess you could say. But we were able to get a number of volunteers from the Historical Society, from the museum, and just kind of other related people to come and help out with that. What we had to do was, many of the newspapers were bound, so they're in these probably about that thick books, 2 or 3 inch thick books, and each book contained a month's worth of newspapers. So every day newspaper for a month in this one book. But beyond that, there were other newspapers that we're not 100% sure what they were doing there, but they were bundles of newspapers that were usually rubber banded. Sometimes they were kind of strapped together with those like plastic, almost zip tied like straps. And those ones had to get boxed up because they were just kind of loose. I don't know how many boxes we went through. Man, there had to have been 60 or 70 boxes that we filled with newspapers. The books were able to transport without having to be put in boxes, because if we had to put them in boxes, the boxes would be huge and not manageable. So that all happened last week and this week. It's a very weird feeling to be covered in newspaper ink and dust for 4 hours while working. But it was a worthwhile project, and I'm happy I got to take part in it. And also shout out to Dana for helping with that. Dana helped with that. We had Kurt. We had Milt, who's kind of also another local aficionado for history. Dana's husband, David, also helped out with that. Jim kind of enlisted most of his family to come out and help, which was fun. And then Corey, also from the Historical Society, came out and was moving stuff with us on Friday. So it was a good little crew. We all wore face masks, no worry about that. And we probably would have wanted to wear masks anyway because there was so much dust. But anyway, and we did get some questions from some of our local history people on the Times Standard. I think, as most newspapers, has a photo archive that they use to pull photos for, articles and things like that. That photo archive is safe. The Historical Society doesn't have it, but the guy who's in charge of the paper hung on to it because the Times Standard is still operating. They didn't completely close or anything. So they still have their photo archive, so it is safe. It did not get thrown away. We were actually able to take a look at it, and Milt found a picture of himself from like the 70s, so that was fun. All right, so what else? So like I said, the museum's been in this building since 1960. Cecile bought it with money that she got from the sale of her family's sheep farm in Mendocino County. So we'll be celebrating our 60th year in this building in August. So that's pretty exciting. And we're trying to plan some sort of celebration. It's very tricky nowadays to be able to plan any kind of celebration or event like that because there's still a pandemic. So what we're doing is we're planning kind of almost two events in one. So we're putting together this thing where here's the stuff we can do if we're able to be open to the public, people can come in and visit, or like a limited number of people can come in at a time. And here's what we're going to do if nobody can come in and it has to be completely physically distant from people. So what the kind of plan is that we'll be keeping tabs on the orders of the health department and adjusting our event. So we might have some things in person if that's possible, or we might have some things virtual, kind of do a combination. So we have options, and it will be a very dynamic event, which is exciting and something we haven't done before. But then again, there's kind of a lot of things that are going on right now that we haven't done before. And we're hoping at that event to reveal the chandeliers. So that'll be exciting. But if you follow us on social media, you might get a sneak peek of the chandeliers. So that's kind of my little bit of spiel I got going on. So let's see if we got any questions. So Dana says, tell us about the scissor lift, the piece of equipment you told us about during the staff meeting, and the challenges of getting it in the door. I may have the name wrong. So yeah, it is a scissor lift. So if you're familiar with scissor lifts, or if you're not, there are these things that are like these big carts, and they have like a platform on the top. So if you're trying to reach something that's really high up, it kind of goes whoop, 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 and it lifts you up on the platform so you can reach high up stuff. So when we're doing the lighting in the main hall here, the bank building, the ceilings are really high up, like very high. So we have to get to them to access the chandelier stuff by using a scissor lift. But with the way this building is built, there's really only one way you can bring a scissor lift in, and that's through our side door for Neelis Hall, which if you've walked by the front of the building, there's like a planter that's kind of a half circle with a big tree in it, and there's like a door. That's our ramp entrance. So if you've seen it, it's kind of flat, and then it's got this really steep incline, and then it kind of does this weird sort of rounded decline. So when you're trying to get a scissor lift somewhere, they're low to the wheels are low to the ground. The entire bed of the scissor lift is pretty low to the ground. So it doesn't really have any lift on it. So if you're trying to go up something steep, you can kind of high center it. So it's kind of a whole song and dance to get the scissor lift in the building. You kind of have to go at it from across the alleyway and kind of like zoom towards the door, but then there's only about a 1/4 inch space on either side of the lift when you're trying to get through the door, and then if you're on the lift, you have to duck to get through the door. So it takes a real feat of knowing how to steer scissor lifts to get through that door. And then once you get through the door, there's a pretty sharp turn to get into Neelis Hall. And it's kind of like a 20-point turn to get the lift turned around, and then into Neelis Hall. I think this last time we moved it in, it probably only took 10 or 15 minutes. In the past, it has taken longer. I think one time a handrail almost got taken off the wall because we couldn't get it around the corner, and it was this whole crazy thing. But this is your lift. It is in the building. So another question is the building already wired for the lighting, or is that part of the project? So that was done in January. We close every year in January to do a bunch of work that we can't do when we're open. So during that time, Bob from Bob White Electric and his crew of electricians descended on the museum and replaced the lighting. We have a bunch of fluorescent lights. They replaced all those. They replaced the lights in Neelis Hall, so they're significantly brighter and better for the items on display. But they also did the rewiring for the chandeliers. So the crazy thing with accessing the chandelier wiring and stuff like that is that you have to go through a crawl space, which is probably only about maybe 2 feet tall. And it's really dark, and there's a lot of dirt just from it being old. But it's separate from our collection spaces and stuff like that. So the dirt doesn't get everywhere, but it's just kind of there. So you have to crawl through this dark space, and then there's a gap at some point that they had to put boards down so you could crawl over the gap, and just crazy stuff. So they did all the wiring for that in January. That was also when they were kind of figuring out how we were going to hang the chandeliers, because originally, so in the ceiling, there's a metal beam, or there's a bunch of metal beams, but the chandeliers are hung directly off these metal beams. So there's a box that's attached to the beam, but we don't actually know how the box is attached. And there's not really a way to tell because of how it's built. But inside that box, there's a pipe that the actual chandelier attaches to. You actually screw the chandelier onto this pipe in the ceiling. But the box is kind of shaky and the pipe's kind of shaky, and we don't really know why it's shaky, so we're not going to use that hanging system because we don't know how safe it is. We're going to be building a different hanging system that Bob and his crew have got figured out. It's an adventure. We have this little drawing here that kind of shows what's going on. So this is the beam. Whoop. This thing is all backwards for me when I'm looking at the camera. Beam, and then there's these clamps that are going to clamp onto it, and I think the clamps also have screws in them. And then there's going to be a plate on the ceiling that the chandelier attaches to. Now, I'm not an engineer or anything like that, so I might not be explaining this right, but I know the people that are building it know exactly what they're doing, so I trust them. But yeah, it's exciting to have a plan, and we're getting along on getting this project done. So stay tuned on our social media if you're a member. Stay tuned on your newsletters and other contact methods to stay on top of when these chandeliers are going to be done, because we're really excited to share them with you. And yeah, so I think I answered that question. So if you have any questions about museums or being a curator or working here or anything museum, local history related, things like that, feel free to ask in the comments. I can read them, I can see them, and I'd be happy to answer your questions the best I can. And yeah, so feel free to ask. It's gotten a little quiet in the comments section here. But let's see. So what else do we got going on here? So right about this time of year, or kind of the end of summer, we start talking about what exhibits we want to do next year. It takes a while for us to plan and research them. It takes a while for us to, talk with people in the community that might be able to help out or look for collaborators, things like that. So we start working on these exhibits early. And yeah, so I'm kind of looking for ideas for exhibits. So if there's something about Humboldt County's history that you've always wanted to know more about, or something that you think we haven't covered in the past but should now, feel free to let us know. There's a Facebook post on our museum Facebook about that, and we've already had a lot of people chime in on that, which is really nice. But we're always looking for something, out of the ordinary, something that'll be exciting for people to see. And with exhibits, it's really important too that we collaborate with other people. That's something that I've taken up pretty seriously as I've worked here for the last it'll be 3 years in September. I feel like there's a lot more you can do when you're working with other people. There's a lot more of, a larger story that comes through when you start talking to other people about how they're related to the history. And I feel like it creates just a well-rounded, more invested in exhibit. We did that a lot with the Redwood National Park exhibit a couple summers ago. And with that exhibit, we had a really cool opening where we invited people from the parks and people from Save the Redwoods League and other people that helped us with that exhibit. And we had a couple little speeches made, and people got to view the exhibit. So that was exciting. So we got one suggestion: urban legends. Aside from Bigfoot, are there any local urban legends? Urban legends. I mean, I know there's like a guy, and I can't remember the guy's name, but I know Alex Service helps him out or also leads tours. But they do ghost tours of Old Town, which is really cool. So there's definitely urban legends around ghosts. And did I say ghost towns? I meant ghosts in old towns. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. But yeah, urban legends, that would be a fun one. I had an idea for a like mythic Humboldt County kind of thing, because there's this something I've noticed at least is that there's kind of this point in our earlier counties, post-contact history, where there are these people that are big names, but when you go to like look more into them and look more into their stories and everything like that, you start noticing that most of the things that you come across in their story are more secondary sources than primary sources, particularly with like William Carson, Carson Mansion, Carson Lumber, that whole thing. I think he was one of them, but it was I think him and then some other New Brunswick lumber men that came out here and made a bunch of money being lumbermen. When they died, they asked that all their personal documents were destroyed, which is interesting. So that kind of explains why there's kind of this secondary source only thing. But it's interesting to see how that's kind of taken on a life of its own. There's all these stories about William Carson being super benevolent, and you compare him especially to someone like A.B. Hammond and all kinds of stuff like that. So I just thought that would be kind of cool to talk about these like mythic characters of Humboldt County, but it would take a little bit more to like dig it out. So anyway, so we're talking, for people that are kind of tuning in, tuning out, we're talking exhibits. What would you like to see at the Clark Museum? We've gotten some proposals for things about like the floods. Humboldt County has been hit by a boatload of floods. That was kind of a bad pun. But, the 55 flood, which was called the 100-year flood, the 64 flood, which is called the 1,000-year flood, and then all kinds of other ones kind of intermittently in between. There's a great movie on the 1964 flood that what later became Caltrans, I think it was called something else at the time, they put together with footage filmed during the flood while it was happening, and one of the clips was of a bridge just getting absolutely battered by stuff floating down the river, and then eventually the bridge just breaks off and floats away, which is nuts to see on video. I could only imagine what it would be like to actually be there. That would be crazy. But things like natural disasters, things like that. Some people brought up logging, some people brought up boats and fishing and maritime kind of history. We have a pretty significant collection of boat building tools that many of them were handmade, which was really cool. Things that are like really fancy woods that guys would get a hold of, and then they'd make them into their boat building tools, and really cool. I don't know a whole heck of a lot about it, but I'm sure there's plenty of people around that probably do, especially if we talk to someone like at the Maritime Museum or things like that. So Dana asks, how did they determine it was a 1,000-year flood? I'm not really sure. I know there's different like land zoning type stuff where like this is a 100-year floodplain. I don't know if they actually have a classification for a 1,000-year floodplain. That might have just been something that was coined by the news people at the time, because it was such a huge flood. It kind of wrecked a lot of Humboldt County, like a lot of southern Humboldt. There are towns that are just completely gone or like completely changed from the flood. So that might be why, just because it was such a big flood. And that flood, just kind of how it happened, is pretty interesting. There were a bunch of things going on that contributed to it. At the time, there was a high tide, so the water that was coming out of the rivers couldn't really get out of the rivers as fast. There was a lot of rain that year. There was also a lot of logging going on in the watersheds, so water wasn't being absorbed into the hillsides. It was just running off into the rivers. It was pulling silt with it and debris and all kinds of stuff. So it just was so much happening all at the same time that it just led to some really crazy destruction. There's also a story about a cow, I think, that got swept down the river, but it made it and survived for a couple more years after the fact, even though it was like in the ocean at one point. Pretty crazy stuff. I think that's in, I think I read that in Both Sides of the Bluff. That might have been where that was from. So maybe it was just dramatic license, yeah, basically. I think, as far as I know, I haven't widely researched the topic. It was just some kind of my idea of maybe that's how it got the name 1,000-Year Flood. So anyway, so what other ideas have we gotten so far? There was something that's always kind of been bouncing around because it's kind of very persistent being in Humboldt County, is an exhibit on marijuana. There's still kind of a lot of work we'd have to do to figure out how we'd get items for that exhibit, what those items would look like, what the stories would be that we're telling, because I mean it is a big part of our more recent Humboldt County history with the Back to the Land movement, and things like that. So that's kind of always on the table for possible future exhibits, because it's kind of hard to go other places, and say, oh, I'm from Humboldt County, and have people be like, Humboldt, I mean, more recently, it's kind of been the whole Murder Mountain thing, which is really kind of unfortunate. But anyway, so speaking of things that the county is known for, did you guys see the new, the city of Eureka, rather than a county? The city of Eureka just opened its new marketing campaign, which is really interesting. I've been seeing a lot of different reactions to their, they got new billboards, they got a new logo, they got all kinds of other like websites and things like that they're putting up. And yeah, so I've been kind of keeping tabs on what's going on with that. It's interesting to see how, as a city, Eddie Alexander's trying to give Eureka kind of a unique brand kind of thing. I thought it was interesting that they chose kind of the tagline, I guess it would be, but I don't know if that's kind of the right word, but the tagline for Resilient Eureka, I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm a pretty good speller, and I have a hard time spelling resilient sometimes, so that's kind of something to keep in mind. But just kind of the concept of Eureka being a resilient place was really interesting, because it is. I mean, we were just talking about the 64 flood. That affected most people in the county one way or another, whether it was their own house getting wiped down the river or someone else they knew getting wiped down the river, or not being able to leave the county because all the roads are gone. There was that. There was all these different booming and busting economies over the whole history of the county. People making it through that, communities making it through that. The pandemic, like that's a whole nother kind of example of how we can recover as a community. So I don't know if they intentionally were like trying to refer to the history of the area when they were kind of coined the term resilient. But if they were, good on them. If they weren't, they should come talk to some of us history people, and we can really kind of give some backup to that resilient kind of picture. So I'm kind of looking forward to see what they end up doing with that, and I will definitely be keeping track of it. And I kind of like the idea, Eureka is a resilient place. So let's see. So any other exhibit ideas? Any questions? Any comments? Anything you've ever wanted to know about museums and museum life? And do the mannequins come alive at night? Yeah, so we're still open to questions. Feel free to ask. I've been seeing people kind of tune in and tune out throughout this whole broadcast, so I'm kind of interested to see who's here and who's coming in, coming out, and kind of stuff like that. So anyway, yeah. So let's see, what were some of the other exhibit ideas that people brought up? There were lots of suggestions about Neelis Hall related stuff. Some of it had to do with repatriation, which as an organization we're continually working on. Kind of always working on that. And how, we want to accomplish that kind of thing. Moral obligations to do it, legal obligations to do that kind of thing. So there will be more information on that to come. But kind of things I've been looking around at Neelis Hall lately for exhibit ideas, because it is important, swap things out and put different things on display, and there's all kinds of different stories that could be told using the items in that hall. We recently took down a large panel. Some people call it a mural, but it's not painted. It's like a photo that was printed on this particle board type stuff. And that recently got taken down. It was an Emma Freeman reprint photo. It was a reprint. But the thing with Emma Freeman, if you guys aren't familiar with her, and I can't remember if I talked about this previously, so sorry if I did already, but Emma Freeman was a local photographer around the turn of the century-ish. And she was really into doing these like native person portraits, which is cool. But what she would do is she'd incorporate like regalia from other tribes that are like from the East Coast or the Midwest or all over the place, along with regalia worn locally. And so she just kind of did these pan-Indian kind of portrait things. And the photo was a picture of a local river, but it had like a Midwest canoe in it, which was always kind of weird because then we had one of the local canoes sitting right in front of it, and people were kind of always like, why? So one of those panels actually fell down. It didn't break anything, but it fell down, and they were kind of hammered. They'd been up there since probably 1979 when that hall opened, so it was kind of time for them to come down. So now we have portraits of local weavers up that were taken in the 80s or 90s. But after those portraits come down, those will be up for the Notable Women of Humboldt County exhibit. Once those go down, I'm thinking about hanging up we have other pictures of people in canoes using them for fishing, things like that, transport. So those will probably go up talking a little bit more about life on the river, because that's a super important part of a lot of the native groups up here. Let's see. So Dana says, I'd like to know more about Murder Mountain. I don't actually know a lot about it. There's a Netflix special of the same name that kind of is dramatized in different parts of it. But they're talking about an area called Alder Point, which is kind of out in Soham. So go look into the history of Alder Point and kind of the stuff going on down there if you want to know more about that area. And then Dave wants to know if there are any local paleontology exhibits. If there are, they're at the Natural History Museum that's operated by HSU. That's in Arcata. It's across the street from Wildberries. They are probably closed right now also. something kind of fun about that museum. So they used to be located kind of across the street and then like down across another street in what's now Redwood Capital Bank. But if you go in that bank, when that building was built, and I'm not 100% sure how this worked out, but there were dinosaurs that were put in the building as part of that museum. But then when the museum moved, they couldn't take them with them, or they didn't have enough room. I think it was that they didn't have enough room, or they were, couldn't be disassembled or something like that. So they left them. So that bank has like pterodactyls in it, which is kind of funny. I've only seen them from outside. I haven't actually gone in the bank, but it was always something kind of weird, like, why does this bank have dinosaurs in it? Kind of thing. So Redwood Capital Bank, right across from Wild Berries. And then if you go across the other way from Wild Berries, the Natural History Museum, I think they have paleontology exhibits and dinosaur-related stuff. They have like a, what's it called? Velociraptor, that's what it is. They have a velociraptor in the window there. Just wanted to go, rare. Anyway. So, any questions? Trying to think what else is going on. So, I mean, there's always kind of other little random admin-y stuff that I'm working on, which is not super interesting, kind of stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of researching stuff about local history. Researching and sharing it is kind of one of my favorite parts of the job. Doing that through the blog, doing it through stuff like this, doing it through our trivia that we're starting to do at the end of every month. So stay tuned for that for the last, which actually, let me check real quick. Oh no. Oh, that's next week. Okay. So we're doing trivia once a month on Ask the Curator. So keep an eye out for the next one of that. Any questions? No question is a dumb question. Let's see. So something that was kind of interesting that came up yesterday. Yeah, I think it was yesterday. And this has come up before as well. Let's see, Humboldt Bay Social Club. It's I think they're called a boutique hotel out in Samoa area. So they're a little hotel complex kind of thing, and a bar, and they got like an airplane hangar. It's built in an old air base out in Samoa. And the people that run it sound really super cool, and I've gone out there for different events and things like that. But they posted something on their social media that had to do with an honor tax, which if you're not from around this area or familiar with kind of the local Native community, you might not have heard of it. The first time I ever heard of it was when I was at HSU. There was kind of an Associated Students thing to vote for adding an honor tax, I think, to food purchases on campus, and I don't think it ended up passing. But the idea is that pretty much everywhere you go is land that was owned by a Native culture, Native tribe, Native group, and that land was taken, which is pretty well documented, that was a thing that happened. And the idea is to give money back to the tribes as kind of repaying for, thank you for, allowing us to continue living on your land. Here's an honor tax kind of thing. And they posted a thing about it. If you want to learn more about it, there's one particularly set up for the Wiyot, which is kind of this whole Humboldt Bay region, the Wiyot tribe. It's their ancestral homeland. It's called honortax.org. You can go and check that out. It's a really interesting concept, and definitely not one I ever saw when I lived in Southern California. But we also didn't really learn much about Native history in Southern California outside of the missions, which is really problematic. So we have some questions over here. So what's the most boring thing you have to do as a curator? There's definitely been times where I've been, like for one reason or another, I can't leave the office, so I have to find stuff to do in the office. And like one time, I think the museum supervisor was out of town, and I was the only one working, I think. And I was like, okay, well, I have to stay in the office. I can't really leave the office in case someone shows up looking for me or calls or whatnot. So I sat and I scanned photos for a super long time, for like 2 or 3 weeks. And kind of by the end of that, I was feeling like I was going a little crazy. I mean, it was a lot of fun because I got to see a lot of different photos and different things. But after a while, it was just like, scanning, kind of that more super duper repetitive stuff. I have a hard time with. I kind of like variation. So that's probably the most boring thing I've had to do. It's usually a pretty good adventure here, working here at the museum. There's always something different going on. And you never really, like, you kind of have plans for your day, and then you come in, and sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, my plans have completely changed, and now this is what I'm doing today. So Dana asks, or actually Dave asks, is there any chance of swapping with other museums to do traveling exhibits? We have talked about that. So before this whole pandemic thing happened, kind of at the end of last year, we were working with the library here in Eureka to drop off some cases over there and do little rotating exhibits kind of in the area by the children's reading room. So we had it all measured out and had plans done, and I actually wrote up stuff for an exhibit on the history of Humboldt County libraries, and the plan was to unveil that in this year, 2020. But then the pandemic happened, and there's been a bunch of other changes. So we haven't really been able to do that yet. But we have plans for that one written up. We have plans for kind of, like, we have a current exhibit right now in Neelis Hall called When Designs Escaped Baskets. And so that, Brittany wrote up a small kind of like distilled version of that could be turned into a traveling exhibit and taken there. And so that's something we have been investigating, but just with the pandemic, it hasn't really been able to happen. And I feel like we talked to the Eureka Inn at one point too about it, but that was a really long time ago, and I can't really remember. But we do team up with other museums to loan out items occasionally. Like there was Ron Johnson, who worked at HSU for a while and has done a bunch of different exhibits all over the place. Oh, Briani, I hope I'm saying your name right, says, thanks so much. This has been very interesting. Thanks. Love hearing that. So anyway, Ron Johnson he's done exhibits here, he's done exhibits at the Trinidad Museum, and right now he's working on one that is about tobacco baskets and tobacco usage with local tribes, which is an interesting topic, one that you don't really see a lot about. Like, you see tobacco baskets, but you're not necessarily like, what kind of tobacco was it? Was it really tobacco? How did they use it? Why is this basket a different size? Stuff like that. So he's doing an exhibit on that at the Trinidad Museum that I think is going to open in the fall. That's kind of the plan, at least, is for it to open in the fall. And so he was asking us about baskets that could be loaned out for that. And when it comes to Neelis Hall collections, there's kind of a different, well, it's not different, but it's some of the collections there, when donated by the donors, sometimes they include stipulations that they couldn't be loaned out. So we have to adhere to that request. So I think, because I think I showed him like 4 or 5 baskets, and I think like 3 of them are able to go out. So those might be showing up at the Trinidad Museum when they do their exhibit in the fall. And we have talked to him about bringing that exhibit here afterwards. So, it's kind of, it would be in 2021. It'd be a little bit from now. But so keep an eye out for that. And I'm always looking for more ways to do like collaboration type stuff like that with the other museums. Or, picking a topic and saying, okay, so we're going to explore fishing or something, and then like have different museums kind of do their take on it, how fishing affected their community. Like, how is it different in Trinidad versus like Blue Lake versus here on Humboldt Bay, like kind of stuff like that. So, and kind of the hope for that kind of thing is we have this little organization called the North Coast Museum Alliance, and it's just kind of a group where a bunch of us get together, a bunch of us museum and archives and museum-related people get together, and we talk about what we're doing, things that we might need help with, ways that we can collaborate with one another. And it's a lot of fun. We had one meeting a couple months ago that was virtual, but it's kind of cool to get together with other museum people and talk about, like, these are the things we're facing, and then you can hear a couple people say, yeah, me too. How can we fix this? And it's a good little group to work with. So we're hoping to, kind of be able to use that as an avenue for more collaboration with other museums. So that kind of is a really long-winded answer to, yes, we do swap with other museums to do exhibits and to share items for loan. So if you have any questions, we got about 15 minutes. Got any comments? I like reading comments and responding to them. That is also a valid way to contribute. So let's see. So one thing I always thought that would be kind of interesting to do, it's kind of fun to use this a little bit as a sounding board sometimes, see what people are thinking, is doing some kind of, so you're interested in local history. How can you get involved? How can you learn more about stuff? How can you work on a project that you're particularly interested in if you're stuck on something and you can't find the one missing piece or whatnot? So I've been thinking about ways that we could do some kind of educational program through the museum to help people with that kind of thing. Because it kind of seems to me when I'm looking at our local history community that there's people that have been doing it for a really long time and know the ins and outs, and they're like, this is the thing I research, and they're kind of the go-to person for that. But there's not a lot, at least that I've met, and it might just be based on the circles of history people I hang out with. There's not a lot of people that are kind of newer to it or just kind of getting there, figuring it out. And it'd be cool to kind of get, a group together of people, if this was done now virtually, of course, but getting a group of people together who are like, I'm new to this history thing. How do it sounds interesting, but I don't really know who to talk to. I don't know anyone. How do I break into this group? I don't know. I think that'd be kind of a cool thing to try out at some point. But I'm just not 100% sure how that would happen or if there's interest in that kind of thing. Because one thing, as kind of a younger person in Humboldt County, recent out of college, postgraduate, but not master's graduate, is that it's kind of hard to break into communities in this area. If you're trying to make friends, it's hard. And I don't know, maybe doing some kind of bridging the gap between people who are interested in history but don't really know how to get involved and people who are interested in history and are willing to share it. I think that'd be kind of a cool thing to do. I don't know if that sounds like something interesting. And that's kind of when we did the history symposium last year. That was part of the goal, is that if there were people that were like, oh, cool, there's going to be some talks on history, I'll go check it out and maybe meet some new people. That was kind of one of the goals for the history symposium. And I mean, it was really hard to measure if that actually ended up working out. I mean, I did see a lot of people I recognized, and I saw a bunch of people that I didn't recognize, but I didn't know if I didn't recognize them just because they weren't really affiliated with the museum, or if they were new, or if they were just kind of random people that were like, history's cool, I'm gonna go check it out, and then I'm gonna go home and continue with my life. But yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking about that for a while, doing some kind of local history, introduction to local history, meet some people, learn some things, work on your projects if you have a book you want to write or whatnot. But I don't know. It's always been something I've kind of thought about. Any questions? Feel free to ask them in the comments. Let's see. And so, okay, so another thing. In the past, I've done... Whoops. There's like some stuff under the desk here. In the past, I've done presentations on... Like I did one recently on kind of a super, like, Cliff Note squared version of some of the protests in Humboldt County's history. And I kind of like doing those presentations. They're pretty fun. But I'm always kind of looking for topics. So if there's any particular topic that you're like, heck yeah, share more information on that, share us some cool pictures, let me know in the comments, of course, or, through email. I did a blog post once on it was the rise and fall of the Eureka streetcar system, which was kind of fueled by these pictures I found of streetcars in Eureka being set on fire, and it was really strange. So I did a bunch more research into it, and it ended up being a super popular little story that made its way around the internet. And it had a lot of great pictures, actually, too. So I don't know, I'm kind of thinking of different presentation ideas like that. That was a pretty fun one. Personally, I really wish there were streetcars around still, because those seem rad. And then I could take a streetcar to work and not have to drive. It'd be very cool. Dave says that sounds very cool. Yeah, the pictures are pretty great. And we were able to collaborate with an artist who was painting a street box, or not street box. What the heck is a street box? A electrical box on S Street, S and Harris, I think it was. Where there used to be a streetcar stop. Trolleys and streetcars are different. People get weird about it. But she used some of the pictures we have here in the collection as resources for that. So another great reason for scanning photos is we can send them to people like that are doing historically accurate paintings around town. And we have like a uniform from the streetcar guys and all kinds of stuff. So like that would be kind of cool. And the labor history of Humboldt County is really interesting also. If you've ever heard of the Union Labor Hospital, there were different like strikes that took place also around the town or around the county when it came to getting better working conditions for mill workers and loggers and things like that. I've always kind of been interested in that kind of history. And of course, this always kind of ties into exhibits as well. Like I kind of use the blogs as a sounding board for possible exhibits, or just ways where I'm like, I found this thing when I was researching something else. I'm going to write something up about it and then use it again for something else later. They're a lot of fun. Kind of keeps my brain stimulated about history. Cool. So, yeah, and what are some other exhibits and blogs and things? World War II history in Humboldt County. That's come up. I think there was one exhibit on that probably four or 5 years ago, something like that. We have a bunch of World War II related stuff. It could also be interesting to do one on like the Vietnam War in Humboldt County and how responses were to that. Of course, in that previous protest-related PowerPoint that I did, I talked a little bit about the March for Peace. Oh, my memory's not very good. But it was a big, large-scale protest, about 3,000 people in Arcata to protest the Vietnam War, talking about Kent State, all that kind of stuff. The Vietnam War stuff kind of got drummed up for me when I was watching I started watching a movie on Netflix yesterday. It's a new Spike Lee movie. It's called Da 5 Bloods. I haven't completed watching it yet. I only watched the first 5 minutes or so, but it made me realize how much I don't really know about the Vietnam War. Because when I was in school, it was one of those things where the teacher says, and then the Vietnam War happened, and then history continued, and no one really talked about it, which was really interesting because it's a modern day kind of thing, but people are like, it's too modern, it doesn't count as history, but it is, So anyway, Vietnam War in Humboldt County would be really interesting. World War II in Humboldt County would be really interesting. Someone also mentioned the Civil War in Humboldt County's history, which I haven't really spent any time looking into that, besides knowing that some of our firearm collection is Civil War era, around that time period. And also like the general grant quilt that goes on display every 2 years, having to do with a quilt that was made to raise money for the different sanitary societies to help the Union troops. Those are really the only two Civil War related things I know about here in Humboldt County, but that's something that was also brought up as a potential exhibit. And yeah, I mean, personally, I haven't done a lot of research into war history, so it's just something that's never really stood out for me. I know there's tons of people out there that are just absolutely like, yeah, history, war history, woo, people get really excited about it. But it's something I haven't really looked into. I've looked kind of more into like the social movement sides of history rather than like the fighting and the guns and stuff like that and the battles. I always had a hard time remembering that stuff when I was in school. Thinking, oh, did this battle happen before this battle happened? And it was like, well, where did this one happen? I don't know. But yeah. So I think, well, we got about 5 minutes. So if there's any last minute questions that you're just like, ooh, should I ask? Oh, should I comment? Now's the time. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait a bit. Yeah. Questions, comments, concerns. I suppose I should come up with more talking points. Anyway, these Ask a Curator videos are pretty fun to do. I don't know, it's kind of fun to talk to the public. And this is pretty informal too, obviously. I have some notes, but it's kind of guided a little bit by where the little conversation goes. And it's kind of a less formal dealio. Because I can say dealio. Anyway, so I guess I'll just kind of wrap up. So thanks for attending today's Ask the Curator. My name's Katie. I'm from the Clark Historical Museum in Old Town Eureka. As always, if you enjoyed this or if you enjoy any of our other social media sharings or website sharings or anything like that, you can always feel free to donate. There's donate buttons all over our Facebook page, as well as on our website. And if there's any, if you have any friends that are not really doing the social media thing, which is understandable, a lot of our content does end up getting posted onto our website, including these videos. They're usually up within a week. So you can definitely steer them that way. And we are always adding things to our website as well. So there's always something kind of new on there. There's different blog things. There's different videos, all kinds of stuff. So feel free to share. Feel free to donate if that's something you're inclined to do. You can always also become a member. We have different membership opportunities available on our website. The lowest one is $10 a month, and that will get you access to hundreds of museums across the country when they reopen through the NARM and ROAM programs. We also have a membership level that's $25 for the year for students or seniors. We have a $55 family membership and then a $100 patron membership that has that NARM and ROAM benefit included as well. So if you're looking for a present for your dad or for someone who recently graduated, some good options there. Also, if you're looking for things for people from, who may be graduating or Father's Day or birthday or any other holiday, the Eureka Friday Night Market is currently going on right now, every Friday until, I think, beginning of September. Don't quote me on that. EurekaFridayNightMarket.com. They are the people that are in the front part of the museum. They run the visitor center. And they are taking orders on their website. So you go on the website, you order some stuff, and then you pick it up on Friday. And and they're in their second week. So there's all kinds of different local makers that are selling things for you to purchase and pick up here at the museum. If you're, on your way to Old Town, maybe pick up some food as well. So there's lots of ways to support. And the important thing is, supporting your community when things are really crazy, like they have been for the last 3 months. So do what you can. And we appreciate the things you do for the community. It's a great little community to be a part of. So with that, I will sign off for today. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to seeing y'all soon through our different social media offerings. And we will see you in the future. Have a good day and stay safe out there.